To the webinar that is focused on Maryland Climate Smart Agriculture, our roadmap to resilience. And on behalf of the Hughes Center, I'm Nancy Nunn, the interim director, and I'm happy to welcome you to this event. I have a couple of slides about the Hughes Center, but prior to talking about the center, I just wanted to give you some logistics for this webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and we're going to try to hold all questions and answers until the end of the presentation so that we can maximize our time together. At the bottom of your screen, there is a question and answer box, and we ask that you put your questions in there, and you can do that anytime during the presentation. So with that said, again, thanks for joining us. I'm joined today by Ernie Shea, who is the president of Solutions from the Land, and Dr. Paneet Shrivastava, who is the associate dean for research and associate director of the Maryland Agricultural Experiment Stations. And they will actually be providing you with a presentation on the roadmap. So the Hughes Center, I think most of you are probably familiar with us. And I know looking at the names earlier of people that have registered, many of you have either been involved with us on projects or attended earlier events. We were founded in 1999 as a 501c3. We are a nonprofit organization affiliated with the University of Maryland's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And we are really founded around the idea that it takes diverse voices, diverse opinions on our leading issues around a table to work together to find appropriate solutions. And that's something that we continue to do today. If you look at our board of directors slide, it's a really diverse group of people. Our mission is to provide leadership to promote environmentally sound as well as economically viable agriculture and forestry as Maryland's preferred land use. And we do this through research, either our own or research that we fund, outreach, and collaboration. And so you'll notice on the next slide, research, policy analysis, and educational outreach are our three main categories. For research, we focus on agriculture, water quality issues, and that can really vary. Each year, we submit or we advertise an RFP for research initiatives that our board have decided and identified as key issues. And we will fund anywhere from 2 to 4 projects. And the research initiatives for this year will be broadcasted or publicized later this month. We also look at policy and how policy can impact the decisions that are being made today, but also can sometimes get in the way of decisions that should need to be made. And so we'll look at it, we'll analyze it, and then we'll provide suggestions there. And probably one of the areas we're most well known for is our outreach efforts. And this project certainly was a good example of the outreach, as well as the research that was needed to get Maryland to the next stage in dealing with climate smart agriculture. Before I turn it over to Ernie, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all the farmers that participated in the many outreach and focus groups that we had. And they were instrumental in providing information for this project. Thank you to the project leadership team. And the project leadership team were farmers, state agency staff, university staff, and they provide nonprofit organizations. They provided countless hours in creating this document. And specifically, thank you to Paneet and Ernie for all of the time that you volunteered for this project. And with that, Ernie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, Nancy, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today to learn a little bit more about the Maryland Climate Smart Agriculture Initiative that we've been working on for the last, probably 4 years. I had the pleasure, along with Dr. Srivastava, of co-chairing the team that spent a tremendous amount of time and energy putting this body of work together that we're going to be sharing with you today. And I think it really boils down to the fact that we recognize that the climate is changing, regardless of your political views or concerns about whether the science is adequate or not. The people that we have been working with, that we've been speaking to, especially farmers, have confirmed to us that these conditions are changing, that they are a threat multiplier to the future of Maryland agriculture, and that we need to be stepping up our efforts to adapt, improve resiliency, to make sure we're protecting the state's #1 commercial industry. We built this roadmap from two major work streams. The first was a research team that we're going to get into in a little bit that brought us up to date on the state of knowledge of climate change and the impact it's having on Maryland agriculture. And we intentionally did this with the College of Agriculture and some other scientific experts to make sure that we were paying attention to the facts, the science. But our work was also informed by extensive outreach that we did with farmers and value chain partners all across the state, where we intentionally started a conversation around two basic questions. The first question was, what's going on? What challenges are you facing that's related to either the climate variation or extreme weather? And we don't care what you call it, but what we're interested in is understanding what challenges you're facing. We then asked them a second question, which was another very direct and simple question, and that was, what help do you need? And on the basis of what we glean from our research team and our outreach with farmers, we produced the roadmap that we're going to share with you today. So next slide, Josh, please. So maybe to begin with this basic question, what is climate smart agriculture? And it's a term that's been around for probably a decade, and it means different things to different people, but the generally accepted common understanding of climate smart agriculture is that it's a way to farm by focusing on three things simultaneously. And the first, and you think of them as pillars, is how can we ensure that we're producing a high quality output of commodities, fruits, vegetables, beef, whatever it is that you're producing without putting additional strains on the natural resource base. We call this sustainable intensification of production. The second pillar is given these various pressures that we're facing from increasingly erratic and extreme weather, how can we improve resilience? How can we adapt? So that is the second pillar. And the third pillar of climate smart agriculture is what we've been talking about a lot in Maryland, and that is an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or address carbon pollution. And what we've found is that when you start a conversation with farmers around pillar number 3, carbon pollution, many of them think automatically that the state or others are looking at them and their operations as a problem. And we found that that is not a constructive way to have conversations. So we very intentionally built this conversation around the 3 pillars, and we started all of our conversations with pillars 1 and 2. What can we do to help your operation remain economically viable and resilient? And when you start the conversation with that approach, you are putting farmers in the middle of the conversation. And what they hear is, you're asking questions about my viability. you're here looking for ways that you can help. That's not a threat. That's something I welcome. And on the basis of that approach, following a climate smart agriculture conversation approach, we had very, very active participation. And what we heard is we've been adapting and improving resiliency for generations. And that's something to celebrate and recognize, but we're not adapting fast enough. So we need additional assistance. Next slide, Josh. The process started back in 2021 with a design phase where we intentionally proposed a way that this work would be carried out. And we presented that to the state legislature and were awarded a $500,000 grant in 2022 to support the build out of the roadmap. And the roadmap framework was built upon, first and foremost, a climate smart agriculture approach, which puts farmers and their needs at the center of the conversation. And we also were very intentional about designing this so that it would be a roadmap that would be co-created by the participants. The University of Maryland has tremendous scientific expertise and outreach across the state, but we didn't want it to be a top-down body of work. We wanted it to be from the ground up. So we very early on created a project leadership team to guide this body of work composed of farmers, state agency partners, conservation and academic associates we work with. And together, the collective leadership team guided this work over the last 3 years. We also spent a tremendous amount of effort reaching out, trying to understand what was actually happening on the ground. We had a full-time outreach coordinator who did organizational meetings with farm and conservation groups, with state agencies, but also with farmers in clusters and in small groups, where we sat down and asked those two questions that I started with: what challenges you're facing, what help you need. And on the basis of what we learned, we brought that together along with the results of a research team that conducted a deeper dive into the state of science, into the needs that they saw and recommendations. And this team was composed of multidisciplinary scientists from AGNR, from UMES, and other academic partners that Puneet can go over. Next slide. This is the team that actually led this work. I'm sure many of you are even on this webinar today, so thank you again. And this is really one of the hallmark aspects of this report, this roadmap. The framework that we use was to have a multi-stakeholder cross-boundary team lead and guide it. Next slide, Josh. So the producers told us, and this is just a quick slide that captures some of the high-cut takeaways, that what they're seeing, what they're experiencing is not normal. We're having increasingly episodes of droughts, followed by extreme and variations in precipitation, from drought to floods. We talked to any number of producers, especially on the lower eastern shore, that were talking about sea level rise and saltwater intrusion and fields being diminished in terms of their productive capability or taken out of production due to higher salinity content. We talked to producers who shared experience that they've had from increasingly intense storm events, and they all aren't just hurricanes, derechos, floods. We found evidence of producers facing new pests and invasive species and wildlife pressures that are fueled by the increasingly erratic and extreme weather and climatic conditions that the state is facing. And this covered whether or not you're producing row crops or vegetables or livestock. It covers the full spectrum of Maryland agriculture. We're a very diverse state, and we didn't find any sector that was not impacted in one way or another. And ultimately, what their concerns were was the loss of productivity, the loss of profitability, and for many, the loss of agricultural land, because these pressures and the economic strains are so great that when another opportunity comes along to utilize an agricultural land base, farmers have, in many instances, made the decision to transform and go out of farming and perhaps put their property into a energy infrastructure development with the solar farm. So these are some of the top line messages that we kept hearing from the producers. We also asked them, the next slide, Josh, what challenges do they need help with? And based on these needs, we processed them with our research findings and constructed the roadmap recommendations that we're going to be touching on here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. In terms of our scientific research panel, this is a great little infographic that captures what you can read about in the roadmap, but it's emphasizing the core impacts that we're feeling: more heat, longer and more extreme heat waves that are resulting in reductions in productivity. And corn is a good example. And it's not just more hot days. What we've observed and found is that the higher nighttime temperatures that we're experiencing as we move into mid 2020s is impeding pollination. It's reducing the corn production. So that is one way that we've begun to understand that it's not just those hot summer days that we need to be paying attention to. It's also the hot summer nights. I think we've got another infographic that gives you another feel. Yes, I talked earlier about this variation between drought and floods. Dump and dry is a good way to capture it or remember it. And we've seen more of that with increasingly more intense rainfalls and dangerous storms that don't just cause disruptions in productivity, but cause erosion and nutrient leaching that further impede our ability to farm in a sustainable way, coupled with saltwater intrusion. And the acreage numbers that we identified in the roadmap, over 30,000 acres are going to be affected by 2050. And by 2070, that number could grow to close to 43,000 acres. So it's a lot of acres, and it's something for all of us to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So we've got a roadmap, and we intentionally called it a roadmap. And every once in a while, we slip up and say the word report. But reports live on shelves. Roadmaps are followed. So we have been really paying a lot of attention to calling this a roadmap because it's going to help us adapt and guide as we go forward. And there are two capstone recommendations that I'm going to touch upon. Then I'm going to turn it over to Puneet to cover the core, the heart of the recommendations. But the two most important recommendations that we've identified are the need to really accept and practice the adoption of climate smart agriculture statewide. And remember, there's three pillars. How do you sustainably intensify production? How do you adapt and improve resiliency? And how do you, as a co-benefit of those things, reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So if farmers can get their heads around that, if government agencies, if conservation organization partners, if our value chain partners can put emphasis around framing those conversations around the three pillars, putting farmers at the center, and really paying attention to what affects them in their daily lives, we think we can really build a movement that can help farmers achieve their goals. The second capstone recommendation really is directed to state government. And our state has done a lot over the years to reduce carbon pollution and lead the nation as a major transformer of energy systems from fossil fuel to renewable fuels, which are great things to work on. But what we have observed and what we have shared with our government partners is that we can't manage this agricultural land base in a silo. And one year manage it for renewable energy, another year manage it for nutrient runoff, another year manage it for wildlife habitat, another year manage for other conservation priorities. You've got to treat agricultural landscapes as a integrated um, platform for concurrently ensuring we have safe, nutritious, and available food is a first priority. It comes off our agricultural lands, our farms. But at the same time, when you farm with the types of systems and practices that we've identified in this report, you will improve resiliency and you will concurrently derive other benefits that are important to the state. So as we met with cabinet secretaries in the Moore administration, we shared this need and recognized that they're in a tough position trying to meet societal needs, managing a finite amount of open space and agricultural lands. But we encourage them, and we will be reminding them not to manage in silos, but to integrate and manage for all priorities concurrently so that we can ensure that Maryland agriculture's landscapes are productive and available for future generations of farmers that come our way. So, Puneet, I'm going to turn it over to you for the heart of our recommendations in the roadmap.
Thank you, Ernie. Ernie talked about quite a bit about adopting climate smart agriculture and the three pillars of the climate smart agriculture. So I'm not going to talk about the first top line recommendation that Ernie has so eloquently already talked about, adopting climate smart agriculture and agroforestry statewide. But the next recommendation is evaluate and support adaptive management practices to achieve climate smart ag goals. That means the crop diversification, heat and pest resistance crops, and salt tolerant crops. So when we talk about diversifying crops, and by the way, we have 13 recommendations, and Ernie has gone through a couple of them, so I will not repeat them. But these are broad 13 recommendations, and a lot of detail is in the report. So if you want to know the details, please go through the report. So one of the recommendations I would like to go through is evaluate and support adaptive management practices to achieve climate smart agriculture, that includes crop diversification, and then heat and pest resistance crop and salt tolerant crops. When we talk about crop diversification, we are not talking about the theory that just randomly adopt this crop or that crop, but that crop diversification should be based on the good understanding of the ag markets and the practical consideration with deep understanding of economics. So if you can come up with a crop that might survive in climate change scenarios, but if there is not a market and the economics doesn't suggest it, then probably that crop diversification would not succeed. So it should be based on sound understanding of the ag markets and economics. Also, when we talk about generating new crops that are heat and pest tolerant and saltwater tolerance, we are talking about crop breeding research that should be based on sound science and supported by field trials. So we shouldn't be thinking about generating new varieties of crops that in the labs, but also doing the field trials, perhaps at our experimental stations that can show that these crops can actually do work and can resist heat and pest and salt waters. So that's one of our recommendations. The second recommendation, again, Arnie went through, is integrate ag into state planning as a response to climate change. Incorporate or integrate ag in all kinds of climate adoption, whether we are talking about energy, water quality, forest, and ag production. Ag should be integrated in all our decisions and planning, state level planning. One of the main recommendations we came up with is build an early warning system of climate impact on ag. When you talk about early warning system, again, farmers are looking for high fidelity early warning system. Farmers won't use an early warning system if it doesn't provide high certainty and it's not based on deep understanding of agriculture. So that's why we suggest that yes, early warning systems are needed, but it should be based on sound understanding of how the ag systems work. It should have high certainty, and it should be co-developed with farmers, with University of Maryland Extension System, and with social scientists, so that farmers can actually these early warning systems are actually usable by them, not only useful but usable by them. So that's why it should be co-developed with the farmers. One of the main recommendations they came out was create one-stop shop for farmers seeking information. There are a whole bunch of soil and water conservation practices that are available at the local level. There are state level programs, there are federal programs, and most farmers are often lost in how many different programs are there, which ones are good for them, which ones are not good for them, which ones they can use. So they suggested that perhaps a one-stop shop should be created where all the information related to currently existing soil and water conservation practices are available to them so that they can adopt them on their farms. And many of these, as we'll talk about one of our recommendations, many of these can be tweaked to address climate change impacts as well. The next recommendation was evaluate and expand targeted outreach and education studies. Again, I think University of Maryland Extension has a big role to play here with targeted outreach and education studies in support of climate smart agriculture. Next slide, please. So we had a research team that did lots of detailed studies, but they also found a lot of gaps in our research and a scientific understanding of how climate change is going to impact agriculture and natural resources at the local scale. There are lots of studies that are available at regional scale, at the global scale, but not as many as at the local scale that are meaningful to the farmer. So that's the realization we had, the research team has, and we also, the project leadership team had, that a fine scale evaluation needs to be done. There's a lot of fine scale climate data are currently available, which is a good news, but then we need to know how good these data sets are. And then we need to do fine scale assessment of how the climate is going to impact agriculture. That is something that is still missing. Part of the reason is that we don't have a lot of data to evaluate how good these modeling studies are, and also we lack detailed modeling studies and detailed data to do the good evaluation. So although the fine scale climate data is becoming more and more available, more studies needs to be done at what this fine scale climate data set, how climate is going to impact local scale ag responses. In relation to that, we recently published a study that's published in Theoretical and Applied Climatology. Some of you can look at it. That tells you how at a fine scale in the entire Chesapeake Bay how the climate is changing. And we looked at 20 plus variables of climate and how they are going to respond in future. Another recommendation we came up with that the BMP's best management practices should be expanded and adapted to suit climate change conditions. So we need to evaluate BMPs to make sure that they work in future under climate change scenarios. Again, we are not talking just about doing the modeling studies to figure out which BMPs are going to work in the future, but actually evaluating them in the field through monitoring studies, through field evaluations that are guided by modeling, but actually showing the proof to the farmers so that they can see these BMPs can actually work in climate change scenarios. So that is also needed. I talked about the lack of data, and this report, one of the recommendations of this report was strengthen monitoring and data collection at the local scale so that we can evaluate how climate change is impacting different sectors of agriculture. For example, we need to know how the insects and pests are changing in the state, and without detailed monitoring, we would not know how the insects and pests are changing in the state. Evaluate, update, and fund conservation program. Again, this goes to evaluating existing programs and then evaluating how they can support climate smart ag goals. And if there's a need, then we need to update them, and perhaps if needed, then fund new conservation programs that can support climate smart agriculture. Um, Another recommendation we came up, COVID-19 told us that if our supply chain is vulnerable, if our infrastructure is vulnerable to climate change, COVID didn't tell about climate change, but it did show the vulnerability in our supply chain, and that can result in food insecurity in Maryland. So same thing can happen with climate change also. If there's an intense rainfall event, intense ice storm, intense hurricane passing through, that can expose the vulnerability, the supply chain vulnerability. And that's why this report recommends that we need to build local capacity. Perhaps we need to have more processing plants and more food storage capability in the state so that we can deal with the supply chain disruptions. So more infrastructure needs to be built at a local scale to prepare for changing conditions in climate. Conserve agriculture land. There's a lot of pressure in the state on agriculture land, either due to urban development or perhaps for the expansion of renewable energy such as solar power. And this report recommends that by all means we need to do the best we can to conserve ag land, especially the prime farmland. Also, if we need to expand solar energy in the state on ag lands, perhaps both of them coexist so that the agriculture can continue while we are producing renewable energy in the state. And one of the last recommendation out of those 13 recommendations was to strengthen farmer insurance program. We already know that climate impacts farming quite a bit, and that makes agriculture vulnerable to climate shifts, whether it's a drought, whether it's a flooding event, and things like that. And with the future climate change, farming might become more vulnerable to climate impacts. That's why this report suggests that we should have public-private partnership to provide insurance to farmers, protecting them against climate-related losses. And again, farming itself is is highly vulnerable to climate shifts and lots of other things. So anything we can do to support the farmers through some kind of insurance program so that they can continue to farm and produce the crops and commodities that we need. So those were the 13 recommendations that we came up with. You can again read the details in the report. Josh, next slide, please. So who will do the work? So we paid a lot of attention to figuring out who will do the work. As Ernie pointed out, we are producing a roadmap. We are not just producing the report. So we need to know who is going to provide the leadership, who will contribute to the implementing the recommendations of the report. For every recommendation, all these 13 recommendations actually identifies key players for implementing each of these recommendations. And those are farmers and producers themselves, state agencies. We call upon Maryland Climate Change Commission, Maryland General Assembly and policymaker, governor's office, and also many universities in the state. We have really good universities in the state. For example, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, University of Maryland Extension, lots of public and private institutions in the state. So we do not lack the expertise to implement many of the recommendations. We just all need to come together to address the recommendations. So this was very important for us that we identified the key players and so that they can provide the leadership role and contribute to addressing climate change in the state. Next slide, please. So overall, these are the project outcomes we came up with. We provided a technical report that provides us the data and the information, how climate might impact agriculture and farmers and the farms. It provided a scientific knowledge and tools and ideas for adapting to climate change. It facilitated a lot of discussions. Ernie pointed out that we had a project leadership team. We conducted a lot of listening sessions. We did the surveys. We did a lot of one-on-one interviews. So it facilitated a lot of discussions over the last 4 years around climate change and how it is impacting agriculture, how it might impact agriculture in the future, and what can we do to make it resilient to climate change. Again, the 13 recommendations we went through, Arnie and I went through, are the key recommendations. They are broad, they are pretty encompassing and detailed. So please read the report. So those are the recommendations we came up. So these were the 4 major outcomes of this project that we have been engaged in last 4 years. And now what we are going to do in going forward is we will continue this partnership that we have built throughout the state with farmers, with the state agencies, with value chain partners, as Ani talks about, with nonprofit organization, with the universities, and keeping this group together to make sure that we do implement the recommendations from this report for climate smart agriculture. So with that, thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions regarding what Arnie and I presented, please feel free to type in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those questions.
Actually, if they can put it in the question and answers.
Question and answer. Okay. Thank you, Nancy, for correcting me.
While we wait for questions to come in, let me pose one to you. So our research team that Adele chaired produced a tremendous body of work that's an appendix to this report. Our report was what, 40 couple pages? How long was the research compendium that goes with it?
So I don't remember, but it's probably over 150 or 200 pages. So there's lots of research that went into this. Needless to say that there's a lot more research that needs to be done. But we did, the research team did a really good job in conducting research on how, based on what was available to us, right? Whatever the state of the science is, that's the best that can be done in today's time. But with more detailed studies, we can probably do a lot better job in determining the climate impact.
So, Puneet
Josh,
and
we have
Ernie, you have a question. What recommendations are particularly suited to the counties to take on?
That's a great question. This challenge that we're facing requires contributions and participation from everyone. It's not just state government, and local government plays a role, particularly due to the fact that these climate impacts tend to all be local. What's happening in Garrett County is not the same as happening in Somerset County or Wicomico County. So it may be that a county could be assisting with prioritizing a response to saltwater intrusion, as an example, where we're not having saltwater intrusion in the western part of the state, but on the lower eastern shore we are, where we're seeing impacts to productivity. We're also seeing changes in land use. So the county voice in land use change decisions is extremely important. Another example would be in the integrated managing for multiple problems at the same time. So we talked in our report about needing to protect agricultural land, which is another role that counties can play and help. But we also said if we have to make land use decisions that have trade-offs when we're managing for a renewable energy goal, are we actually supporting and helping agriculture being intact, viable, and economically of such a critical mass that the industry isn't negatively affected? So I think there's a lot that counties can do in the land management decision space as one example.
Okay. Puneet, do you want to add anything, or can I go on to the next one?
Yeah, go on to the next question. I think Arnie did a good job at responding.
All right. What was the role of small-scale agriculture and innovative production in this study or going forward?
Puneet, do you want to take one? And I'm thinking of Farmer Chippy in Baltimore is a great example of that.
Yeah, so I think small scale agriculture, for example, Arnie pointed out Farmer Chippy in urban areas, they will see a lot bigger heat island effect, their hot temperatures and things like that. And, knowing that, there'll be many more warm days and lots of, drought periods, perhaps adapting to, you know, adapting irrigation. Adopting irrigation might help us, manage the heat, manage the water scarcity, and so on. Um, so we did not focus specifically on very small scale agriculture, but they would be impacted just like all the big agriculture, right? Big farms. Well, there are not many big farms, but small farms still in the state. But I don't think this study was able to address really small scale agriculture in urban area. The reason being that the small is really small scale, especially in urban areas, more tends to be produce, not commodity crops, row crops, for example, corn or soybean. So again, those are some of the research gaps that still we need to address. How climate change. I mean, we might be able to estimate how climate change might impact corn and soybean production, but it's different, produces and stuff, vegetables and fruits and stuff that still needs to be evaluated.
On that question of size, the one thing we heard over and over and over again was size doesn't matter. Changing climatic conditions affects everybody, whether you're a small holder farmer, small scale, or a large operator that might be covering several thousand acres. And sometimes the smaller operations have limitations in terms of the ability to pivot and invest in infrastructure that's needed to provide more resilience and more stable production. And we saw that in urban agriculture operations, where they don't have irrigation systems in place to address these dump and drought conditions that we're facing. So finding ways to make sure water is available to production platforms in a place like Baltimore City was a big part of the conversation that we heard there. And you can improvise and provide support. And we saw examples of that where they were running hoses from row homes back into the backyards to try to maintain some type of flow of water. But there's no one size fits all solution here, and all farms will be affected.
So Ernie, this next question is for you. It says, Ernie mentioned in his introduction to the three pillars that adaptation is not happening fast enough. Could you expand on the reasons behind this finding? Is it information gaps, capital schedules, trust, etc.? And Puneet, we certainly want you to weigh in also.
Sure.
I think what we heard was farmers are naturally by nature always experimenting, trying out new practices and systems and approaches. But the challenge that they're facing are coming faster and are more impactful than experimenting around the edges. So they need greater help. And we also heard that there wasn't enough discussion in the state of Maryland on those first two pillars. How can we sustainably intensify production? What help is needed? What resources can government provide? What assistance can the value chain partners provide? And similarly, with pathways to improve resilience, we've put so much emphasis on reducing carbon pollution that sometimes people think that that's the only area of concern with changing climate conditions. But in reality, the ability to be sustainable and the need to adapt and improve resiliency is where the rubber hits the road with farmers. And that's what we're looking to scale up assistance in. And it will be, as Puneet noted in one of his last slides, a all-in commitment that is needed. We need everyone that's part of the food system, which is all of us because we eat, to be paying attention and to thinking about how can we contribute to help farmers adapt and be more resilient and successful.
So I just want to say that, one of the reasons that adaptation is we have not been as successful in adapting to using the three pillars of climate smart ag is the uncertainty. I think farmers really care about how certain are you, how climate is going to change and how it's going to impact me, right? So if there is an information gap, the uncertainty in the climate data, uncertainty in the impacts and things like that. The second thing is, we haven't come up with lots of climate smart uh, practice implementation programs either, right? So, we do have a lot of soil and water conservation programs, but they are not especially for climate change. So we haven't said that, we need to be evaluating through the climate change lens these programs and saying, yeah, these ones could also help with climate smart implementation. So we need to be doing that as well. So not only coming with the new money, but at least looking at the existing programs and how they can help with the climate change adaptation would also help. So, but in my mind, not just based on this research, but my 15 years of research in climate area and also how the climate impacts agriculture, the uncertainty of the impact and uncertainty in the climate data is the biggest factor. Farmers really need to know that, it's really going to impact in this way, one way or the other way, right? It's not like some study says that it's going to impact this way and some study says that it's going to impact that way. And then it becomes confusing for farmers. So if we can, make the information more certain, I think more farmers would implement climate smart practices.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What are some of the best existing financial supports for producers taking on adaptive measures?
Boy, there's any number of financial partners that will need to be drawn in and be part of the transformation that we're talking about. Agricultural lenders, obviously, um, that see the risks that farmers are facing and want their customers to be sustainable over time so they can repay operating loans. So they may be in a position to step up and help with some of the infrastructure changes. If we have to deal with enhancing heating and cooling barns for livestock, that's a pretty significant capital cost. So that's one place that resources could be made available. Government certainly can provide financial support, and we are fortunate that the state of Maryland has been very consistent in providing conservation funding and technical assistance. And we have called out the need for those investments, not to just to continue, but to scale up. So that would be another way that that financial flows can be directed back to help farmers adapt. Our value chain partners that work with farmers to either manage inputs or manage water or manage um, housing where birds, for instance, poultry are grown, they all have investments that are tied to the success of farmers, and they're going to need to be in the conversation about how financial flows that they control can be made available so that a farmer has got the resources that they need over the right period of time to transform, adapt, and ensure that they remain profitable. So those are a couple of thoughts that I had.
Any any additions, Puneet?
No, I think Nick covered it pretty well. So
Okay. Philip, first of all, thank you for your kind words in the chat about the report, and also the fact that you knew how many pages were in the report. That's impressive. Your question is, are you looking at the role that agriculture can play in helping to cool our region?
that's a very important question that we need to be looking at. I don't think we looked at this aspect of how of climate in our report, but that's something could be a future research and looking at, how agriculture can help cool the region. I mean, there would be quite, I mean, with the high temperatures and stuff, things like that, we might have more heat, especially if you are irrigating, we will have more evapotranspiration, that might provide localized cooling and things like that. So that's a question that we should be answering in with our future
Yeah.
research.
But maybe, Puneet, one area that we did touch on that, not so much with the cooling focus, but I remember our discussions with our forestry partners that are part of Maryland agriculture, that healthy forests do a lot with appropriate tree cover to reduce temperatures. I don't know if they're actually cooling at a scale to address the increases in temperature, but Maryland's forest industry is a critical part of Maryland agriculture, and keeping those trees healthy and growing is going to be another solution pathway.
Okay. What work could be done at the, hold on a minute, policy level to improve federal programs for climate smart ag? An example that was provided was modifying CREP to allow for marsh migration zones.
Well, we recognize that our federal partners are an integral part of the conservation partnership that's going to be delivering support services to farmers. And those dollars that come from USDA and any of the USDA cost share programs are critically important. So I think our first message is keep the dollars coming. Now, the current administration has chosen not to prioritize climate change and has been repurposing funding that previously been allocated for climate change. But the way we look at it is we don't care what you call it. These resources are needed by farmers to help sustainably intensify production, adapt and improve resilience, and deliver ecosystem services. So we don't even have to have a conversation about climate change with our federal partners. We can talk about farmers. We need to put farmers first, is what we hear from Secretary Rollins every day. Well, the USDA programs can help farmers be successful and profitable. So we want to do this in partnership with the federal government and not think of them as having different priorities. We may have to have a different type of conversation, but working together is the only way this is going to happen, because the needs that farmers face exceed any one partner's ability to deliver on their own. So if there's ever a time where we need to team up and stay together, it's now. And my career goes back close to 50 years now in the soil and water conservation movement. And I remember well when I started working for Governor Hughes back in the 1980s, and even prior to that, how important this partnership was. And it was born out of crisis. It was born out of the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, when farmers and ranchers were struggling to deal with what at the time was massive drought covering large areas of the heartland of the country. And the production systems and practices were not the right ones to be using, and they needed to transform. The federal government tried to do it on its own and failed miserably. And that led to the aha moment that President Roosevelt had, that we needed to find a different model. And the model that they conceived was to invite the governors across the country to create special purpose soil and water conservation districts that could partner with the states and with the federal government to team up in delivering technical assistance and financial support to farmers. So I think of that as where we are today. That we may not be dealing with dust blowing into Maryland from across Oklahoma and the Midwest, but we're dealing with other things that are happening, like saltwater intrusion. We can't do this on our own. We need to work together.
Anything to add?
I think Nick covered it pretty well. Yeah, we have plenty of questions to go through. So
Yes, we do.
yeah.
So there's two questions from two different people that they're similar in a way. Could you talk more about what you learned from farmers and your research about interests and opportunities to diversify and increase agricultural production in Maryland, particularly as this may be regarding table crops? And the second one was actually talking more about diversification is a major recommendation. What does that look like for larger corn, or soybean farmers, and how are they thinking about diversification?
So, when I talked about the recommendation related to diversification, we are mainly thinking about, maybe developing through our breeding research, developing new varieties of corn and soybean and wheat so that they are drought resistant, they are flood tolerant, drought tolerant, disease tolerant, and things like that. We acknowledge that it's not easy for farmers to switch from one crop to another crop for a variety of reasons, because the market, the economics, the availability of labor, and so on. So when we talked about crop diversification, we are mainly talking about developing new varieties of these crops, corn, soybean, wheat, and so on, that are drought resistant, that are pest resistant, and tolerant to flooding and things like that. So perhaps, Arnie, you can talk about the second part of the question that, I see about the Economic Development Authority. Is that the one? Yeah, our Economic Development Authority is part of the stakeholder engagement in the implementing recommendation in the report.
Yes, absolutely. We met with those, particularly at the county level, that work on economic development. But so too in Maryland with the Department of State Planning that works to ensure successful economic development. Getting their input into solution pathways to the challenges that we're facing is going to be critical. And so they would be another example of a partner in this multi-stakeholder cross-boundary movement that we've created here, whose expertise is going to be critically important for us.
Okay. The next question was about cannabis production. Was it included in the surveys? And if so, what role could cannabis producers play?
I don't believe we did include it, but I think most of the production of cannabis is now in an indoor artificial environment that might be less impacted by climate change. Not totally exempt from it, but it wasn't it wasn't a major part of our focus that I remember.
Okay. The next question is regarding woodland owners and what their challenges are that they've witnessed and opportunities that they may have ahead of us in the critical land use area. And I think you mentioned it briefly, Ernie, but I don't know if you want to expand on it.
Yeah, I think we heard about disease and pest pressure and species substitution. So climate change is just accelerating some of the pressures that our forests are experiencing due to a variety of reasons. And there is a need to really think differently about managing forest land as opposed to agricultural land because it's not an annual crop. These trees live 40, 50, 100 years or longer. And it's a long-term crop. And keeping it healthy when we're dealing with increasing evidence of increases in invasive species that are showing up. We've seen what's been happening with the ash trees in Maryland, with the emerald ash borer. Climate change conditions just adds another layer of pressure to the challenges that our forests are experiencing. So putting more emphasis, and that's where we went in our report, on helping forest landowners manage um, their forests in a way that's going to help improve forest health is a critical one great example of the climate response strategy that we've included in the roadmap.
I would also add that, through our studies, we have learned that uh, saltwater intrusion and sea level rise impacting woodland in our lower eastern shore. In fact, Hughes Center uh, just funded a study to look into how saltwater intrusion is impacting woodland, especially in the lower eastern shore due to saltwater intrusion. So we know that impact definitely exists.
Okay, we have two more questions. I know we have 1 minute, so we can go a few minutes past. Does the report encourage the state upgrade current agricultural preservation ranking criteria to include regenerative agriculture and ecosystem services. This is an opportunity for our public dollars, and current MALF program does not include this, even with a waiting list.
I don't believe we did get quite that granular, but that's a great recommendation right there because agricultural landscapes do more than produce food and fiber. They deliver ecosystem services. And why shouldn't we be recognizing their capacity to deliver those, whether it's filtering and storing water, sequestering carbon, enhancing biodiversity? Those are those attributes of 21st century agriculture that we have found is not part of the conversation. So that's a great way for us to revalue and elevate the importance of protecting agricultural land.
Okay, and the last one, which is actually a really interesting question. What's the time frame you were talking with farmers and other participants about being resilient in? Was it current needs, a 25-year or further horizon? What happens when in the future climate challenges have become more severe and decision-making about resilience has harder questions and trade-offs?
I think I'll start out by saying that our focus was actually getting farmers prepared to deal with the changes that are coming in next 25 years. And our thinking was that if they are able to understand how climate is, and if they are ready to adapt to climate changes and stuff, they would probably make a lot of headway in addressing long-term future climate changes. So they will be prepared to do that. But immediately, if you do not, talk about next 25 years, then you usually lose farmers' attention. Also, I would say as you move away from 25 years into the future, even climate data starts to get very uncertain. So I think to keep that, we have some level of certainty how climate might be changing in 25 years, that most farmers are interested in immediate, time frame. We focused our attention on the 25-year horizon. And with also the thinking that if we can get farmers to start adapting to climate change in the next 25 years, they'll on their way to adapt to long-term climate changes. And
I
you
think
want to
that's
add
right,
something?
Puny. And the reality is that these are generational challenges. This is not going to be solved in 3, 5, 10 years. These are going to be with us for decades to come. So as we talk with a lot of farmers, we recognize that a lot of them were in their 60s and 70s. So they were interested in what's going to be here for my son or daughter or granddaughter, and will they have an opportunity to farm as I have? So it's a long haul, but we can succeed by working together. And I think that's our takeaway message. This challenge is an opportunity for all of us to come together. And with the science foundation that AG&R provides, with the platform that the Hughes Center has as a bridge to the farm community, we're ready to carry forward and help continue this conversation and facilitate the decisions that need to be made to ensure that the tools and resources are available.
So do you two have any concluding or parting comments? I mean, I'd like to I see Rob put a suggestion for research in the question and answers, and I would just encourage everybody that has participated to take time to summarize or read the report and to share any ideas they have regarding research with the team. You could do that with the information that was on the last slide, or to get in touch with the Hughes Center.
So, Nancy, can I make a final comment? Is based on the comment that Mike Maddox posted that we have spent 4 years working on communicating uncertainty in seasonal forecasting for corn within his Dawn project, which I believe is not set in Maryland. It's set in Midwest somewhere, if I'm recalling correctly, but is struggling with resolving that issue. And there lies the challenge, communicating uncertainty. We know there's a lot of uncertainty in the even in the seasonal forecast. So the key to answering that question, deep understanding of the farmer's operations, and then doing just couple of key things that they might be interested in. Right? That would get us. I mean, and I'm saying this based on my 15 years of experience working with the farmer getting them to understand seasonal forecast and the uncertainty in the season. There are a lot of uncertainties, but there are key takeaways that farmer can take to adapt to climate, seasonal climate and long-term climate also. But it goes back to spending time with them, a lot of time with them, truly understanding their operation, truly understanding and their needs and understanding the science to tell them about just key one or two things that would help them. And that's what they're interested in knowing, not all the details of how seasonal climate might impact their operation. And that is not certain. So.
And Nancy, I would close simply with a thank you to everyone that joined the webinar today. If you'd like to be involved on an ongoing basis, drop us a note. We need everyone's participation and help, and your support in keeping the conversation around the Maryland Climate Smart Agricultural Roadmap to Resilience would be much appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.